I would like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on the 26th of March, 2024. I'm calling the meeting to order, and I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation, and express our appreciation to the Algonquin people for their enduring stewardship of these lands over many millennia. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, I would now like to move to the report from Committee of the Whole in camera, and I would turn to Vice Chair Milburn.
The Committee of the Whole met in camera this evening on March 5th and this evening, and reports and recommends as followed. On a motion by Trustee Jenkins that I will second, that staff proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to a financial matter, that the tentative settlement between the OCDSB and PSSU, which will form a collective agreement dated September 1st, 2022 to August 31st, 2026, be ratified, that the tentative settlement between the OCDSB and OSSTF OTBU, which will form a collective agreement dated September 1st, 2022 to August 31st, 2026, be ratified, that the tentative settlement between the OCDSB and SSP, which will form a collective agreement dated September 1st, 2022 to August 31st, 2026, be ratified, and that the tentative settlement between the OCDSB and TBU, which will form a collective agreement dated September 1st, 2022 to August 31st, 2026, be ratified. And they are moved by the trustees on the screen, and I will second all of them.
Thank you very much, Trustee Milburn. We should first vote on receipt of the oh no, we don't have to vote on the receipt of the oral report. So I will ask if any of these motions is something which requires a separate vote. We have debated and voted on all of them in camera. And seeing no request for a separate vote on any of them, I will ask Manager Guthrie if she can open the vote on all of them. And we have a result. All of these motions are carried unanimously, 11 in favor, none opposed. Trustee Milburn.
And that is all for my report from in camera.
Thank you very much. That brings us to approval of the agenda. Could I have a mover for the agenda? Trustee Kaplan-Murth, thank you. Seconded by Trustee Presley. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the question then. All those in favor of the agenda as presented? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Which brings us then to the briefing by the chair. And I can say that late this afternoon, the Ontario government released its 2024 provincial budget. The OCDSB shared our recommendations for education funding in the pre-budget consultation process, particularly regarding increased pressures due to staff replacement costs, transportation challenges, special education, and cybersecurity. Our staff will be reviewing today's budget, and all of us anxiously await the release of the grants for student needs this spring. This will provide detailed information about funding for school boards, which will assist us as we prepare our annual operating budget. Secondly, I'd like to remind everyone to help us highlight the amazing volunteers across the district. Nominations are open for the 2023-2024 Community Recognition Awards. Please consider nominating one of the many community volunteers in our district. Each year, the OCDSB recognizes the valuable contributions of community members, parents, caregivers, and businesses through these awards. More information can be found on our website. And finally, last week, I had the pleasure and the honor of attending an iftar in company with the Director of Education. And when I was invited to give remarks, I included in those remarks the following statement, which I will repeat here. We live in a global community, and events occurring in many parts of the world affect our students and their families, arousing anxiety and grief for one group or another with every headline. At the OCDSB, we're a school board. We have no power over world events, but we can be mindful of how any tragic and horrific event impacts our students. And we can do our utmost to help them feel safe and well cared for at school. And now for the director's briefing.
Through you, Madam Chair, good evening. Thank you. Last week, as our chair has shared, the wonderful iftar celebration of the Anusa Muslims Association was a terrific event and an honor to take part in. I was honored to be part of this special celebration and pleased to accept the Community Partnership Award for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. My thanks to President Jalil Marnouj of AMA for the kind invitation and recognition. I want to extend a blessed Ramadan Mubarak to the entire Muslim community. I know that this year in particular, Ramadan holds increased significance as it provides an opportunity for individuals and communities to draw strength from their faith, come together in solidarity, and cultivate hope and renewal amidst challenging times. I wanted also to share that registration is now open to students from all school boards for our 2024 summer language classes and camps. These programs for students from kindergarten through to grade 8 offer an immersive, engaging experience designed to enhance language skills while fostering cultural appreciation. More details can be found on our website. Excuse me. A reminder about a few upcoming events for parents, guardians, and caregivers. On March 27th, staff with our Learning Support Services team will host a session on kinder success. It will offer tips and strategies to help children prepare for kindergarten. Also on April 4th, author and autism consultant Judy Endo will lead a session exploring autistic strengths, thinking styles, information processing, and support. More information on both these sessions can also be found on our website. Don't forget to check out our new Engage OCDSB online tool to share advice and feedback on policies and other major initiatives. New this month, we've added an opportunity to provide feedback on how the Advisory Committee on Equity can best serve and support our district. Visit the www.ocdsb.ca website for more information. I would also like to take this opportunity to compliment Chair Scott's commentary to state that our students, our staff, and our school communities continue to witness images and scenes of war and strife in many places and spaces across the globe, as previously noted. Although these incredibly complex and challenging circumstances are well beyond our direct control, as Chair Scott has mentioned, as Director of Education, I can share the expressed desire on the part of all of staff that we strive collectively to ensure the safety and stability of our students to the greatest extent possible, delicately balancing freedom of expression and identity with its implications for consideration of harm and/or hurt for others in the process. A worthy endeavor, to be sure, but one that is not easy to accomplish, as we all know, with many varied perspectives and positions, but one that we will continue to work towards at the school and system levels both. Thank you to all members of our organizational community for your care and commitment, your poise and professionalism and patience in helping us do so. It is so greatly appreciated. And finally, this weekend, many in our community will observe Good Friday and Easter. A reminder that there is no school for elementary or secondary students on Friday, March 29th and Monday, April 1st. All OCDSB offices and schools will be closed. We wish all those celebrating a happy Easter. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions for the Director? Seeing none, that brings us to delegations. And as our bylaws permit, we have a number of delegations who are here, some of them virtual and some of them in person this evening. I will be calling on each delegate to come forward or to join us online as their turn comes up. And there will be a timer. All delegations this evening are having up to 2 minutes to make their presentation, after which there may be up to 3 questions from trustees that would be permitted for clarification. And so with that said, I would like to begin by inviting Shannon Boschy to come to the podium. And please begin when you're ready. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here tonight to enter into the record 2 studies about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. I'm going to start with a statement from the OSSTF from yesterday. Principals say recruitment and retention is the #1 problem facing Ontario schools. And my presentation tonight, or delegation, is germane to those issues. If taken seriously, it should illuminate some causes for problems with retention and hiring. I hope you'll examine the studies that I've linked into my written submission. One is the public sentiment research showing Canadians are not on board with what schools are teaching. One is a study about the efficacy of diversity and anti-bias training. The study finds that there is no evidence that anti-bias, anti-racism, or equity programs provide measurable benefits, but there is evidence that they cause problems. These meta-studies date back a century. There's no, people report becoming hyper-vigilant in the workplace following these trainings, associated with high stress and anxiety, feeling like they're targeted and walking on eggshells. It breeds mistrust in the work environment and creates a toxic environment. A growing number of high-profile cases suggest that diversity workshops and their supporting materials regularly promote questionable claims, particularly about overcoming malicious, over the overarching malicious character of the majority population. Similar hostility towards those who challenge the questionable claims under the DEI rubric is part of a pattern of ideological enforcement. Dissenters face real threats and risks of workplace investigations, suspensions, and even career destruction, as my friend Chanel Fall can attest to. But the public doesn't buy the claims of DEI, and it should be easy to understand that the 160,000 teachers in Ontario have the same feelings, but due to the toxic and censorious environment created by DEI frameworks, are forced to live lies at work. Unable to express any disagreement with these toxic policies and the political claims of so-called progressive worldview. Fully 92% of Canadians reject the idea of dividing students into oppressed and oppressor categories based on race and identity. The public's not on board with this. Teachers are not on board with this. Yet these anti-racism, anti-bias, social justice initiatives and DEI programs are being ran through the system at great financial cost with radical fervor.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Are there any questions for Mr. Boschy? And I'm seeing none. We will be speaking about our Valuing Voices survey instrument later later this evening in the meeting if you wish to stay through the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I would like to call next on Ms. Chanel Fall. Speaking with regard to the human rights policy.
Good evening. I'd like to share my concerns regarding the human rights policy adopted by the board in January 2022. While I support the mission to foster true inclusivity for students and staff, there are significant problems with this policy. The most obvious one being that it declares support for both equality and equity at the same time. These terms are often conflated, yet they represent fundamentally contradictory principles. Equality says we should not discriminate on the basis of a protected ground, but equity tells us discrimination is perfectly okay so long as it serves the right groups. If the board supports equity, it simply cannot say that it is fighting against discrimination, and it cannot say that it supports equality for all. The board should know that this is incoherent considering it has defined these terms in the very policy I'm addressing tonight, where it admits that equity means the removal of disparity and disproportionality between groups using extra and positive measures. In other words, people who are assumed to be oppressors due to their identities can and should be discriminated against if it means that people who declare so-called oppressed identities can benefit. Grouping people into oppressor and oppressed categories is a radical Marxist perspective that is not shared by the majority of Canadians, who tend not to judge people according to their assumed identity-based power. We need to stop pretending that those who advocate for discrimination under the guise of equity are progressive and inclusive, and get back to treating people equally, regardless of their skin color and other traits, as this is the best way to foster real inclusion. I ask the board to revise this policy, emphasizing the importance of equality, not equity, as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Don't go away too fast, just in case there are questions. I will first ask if there are any questions for Ms. Fall. And I'm not seeing any. So thank you very much for your delegation.
Thank you.
And we will move next to a delegation by Marianne Graham.
Just going to move the mic a little bit. Shall I begin?
Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. I am very grateful for the chance to speak to you about the incredibly important topic of hiring a Muslim equity coach and an Arabic-speaking equity coach as vital voices for this school board, staff, students, and community. I stand before you as a teacher with 31 years of experience, 16 of those spent here at this school board, teaching multiple subjects and grades. While looking through the OCDSB website recently, I was thrilled to see how far this board has come from the days when we were trying desperately to get the words equity and diversity into regular classrooms. It was not an easy thing to introduce, and as new concepts were challenging the status quo. Now, though, we can speak more explicitly about things such as homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Indigenous racism, and anti-Palestinian racism. It is clear, as stated under the Safe and Caring Schools, that the OCDSB is committed to ensuring everyone can feel safe, valued, and knowing that we belong. A sense of identity and belonging are imperative for all. According to Slavish, Cole, Boyd, and Richardson, a need to belong, to connect deeply with other people and secure places, to align with one's cultural and subcultural identities, and to feel one is part of the system around them appears to be buried deep inside our biology. Connection with other people and places is crucial for survival. You are exploring this sense of belonging through your Identity Matters student survey. You're on a journey to strengthen the diversity of your workforce. Employing an Arabic-speaking equity coach and a Muslim equity coach full-time would clearly be a tremendous milestone on that journey. It is simply the right thing to do. As an educator, I witness positive impacts of people feeling safe, invited, and celebrated. I also see the devastating impact when a student or staff member feels displaced, targeted, invisible, and uninvited. Today, I witnessed an Arabic speaking student change her entire demeanor when she met up with another Arabic speaking student. It was an instant connection and they didn't even know each other. So that kind of connection, to be openly yourselves, is assured with the hiring of these two equity coaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will ask if there are any questions for Ms. Graham. And I'm seeing none, so thank you again. And our next presentation is Mona Lisa Gadban, and this is a Zoom presentation. Ms. Gadban, we can't see you yet.
Oh, sorry. I need to start this. Certainly. Okay.
Good evening, and please go ahead when you're ready.
Hi. Hi. Sorry, I can't be there. Thank you for giving me some time. And I'll start now. I'm here to address the rise of anti-Palestinian racism and lack of voice. Oh, my camera's on. I don't understand. Can you not see me?
We can see you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Would you like me to start
And we
again?
can hear you.
Amazing. Hi. Sorry. We'll get this going. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm here to address the rise of Palestinian racism and lack of boards regulation, policy, and procedures in alleviating the community's suffering and loss in Palestine. There's a disconnect with.
Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
My goodness. Sorry. There's a disconnect with Palestinian and Arab students' identities that really highlights the loss of culture and heritage through visible cross sections. These losses are not acknowledged or sufficiently addressed by staff, board, and dismissed by some high schools. Not all Arabs are Muslim, and not all Muslims are Arab. To think that is to be misinformed. Palestinians are an indigenous community of multiple faiths who are internationally acknowledged to be under occupation, currently facing various systemic and emotional violences. I respectfully ask you to make amendments to call the position Arabic speaking equity coach and Muslim equity coaches. Arabic is Ottawa's third most spoken language, respectfully after our first two official languages, English and French. Arabic and Muslim equity coaches would help further understand the dynamic and culture of Ottawa's growing Arabic community. We can all work together to support the students in your school and communities advocating for students who identify as Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, or Arabic speaking, tackling the lack of cultural sensitivity in schools, tackling lack of sensitivity so staff is able to call out and take action against any Arab discrimination, anti-Palestinian racism, and Islamophobia. Students have a right to know the systemic violence is faced by Palestinians. They should know that their ethnic identity is seen through a colonial settler lens with preconceived prejudices that have found their way into the school systems. This would suggest that current all-inclusive spaces are not inclusive, supportive, or safe, but failing to raise awareness, advancing conversation on how to combat said racism, and the denial of the current Nakba in Gaza, while not training and professional development for educators to debate international human rights, and for it to be mentioned in our classrooms is doing a disservice to the students and the protection of their intersectional identities. And under the Charter of Right and Freedoms, we all have to observe and to not be discriminatory. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions for Ms. Gadban? And I'm not seeing any, but please continue to watch our meeting. There will be further discussions later in the meeting.
Thank you so much. Really, I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Moving on then, our next delegation is Jana Mugrabi in person. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Jenna. I'm a student at Longfields-Davidson Heights Secondary School, and today I'm going to be just talking about why I encourage the hiring of an Arabic-speaking equity coach and a Muslim equity coach. I believe that we should do this because we need people who can better understand and better support Arab students and Muslim students and be there for us and supporting our culture. There have been too many instances where students have been victim to scrutiny, canceling, and even racism due to where they are from, especially recently with for Palestinians. But this didn't just start recently. Last year, I had teachers claim that they felt unsafe when students brought in their Palestinian flag. But it wasn't just Palestinians, students who were victim of this kind of canceling, I guess you could call it. Other Arab students were told that their country symbols were political statement, having them threatened to be taken away and actually having them taken away during certain times. This was just one of the many things that encouraged us to start a Palestinian Student Association at my school to form a stronger community that could help navigate unfortunate situations like these. And with the help of Arabic-speaking coaches and Muslim-speaking coaches, Muslim equity coaches, we hope to have this kind of level of community brought into the school board as well, not just in our school. We also ask that these coaches be named what they are, Arabic-speaking equity coach and a Muslim equity coach, so that we can ensure that there will always be, forever be individuals who can advocate for people like us and guide the school board to help better support young Arabs and Muslims in the school board.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions for Ms. Mukrabi? And I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much for coming tonight. Our next delegation is in person also by Hala Dabusi. Welcome.
Good evening. I speak as a delegate on a crucial matter that deeply concerns me as a parent and member of the Muslim and Arabic-speaking community within the OCDSB. I want to stress the urgent need for the establishment of two specific positions within the school system, a Muslim equity coach and an Arabic-speaking equity coach. I emphasize the titles. We are not asking for a generic equity coach. Recently, my daughter informed me about a concerning incident during one of the morning announcements at her school. It was mentioned that a group of students felt threatened, urging sympathy toward them. Whereas our heart go out to all students who certainly deserve a peaceful school environment, no mention was made of the Muslim and Arab student sentiments given the plight of Palestinians. This one-sided narrative, intentional or just as a result of lack of trained staff, send a message of cultural superiority, which is deeply troubling. The current situation requires coach with specific skill sets, including cultural competence and an understanding of the Arabic culture, along with its global connection, such the human rights violations against Palestinian, colonization, occupation, and the refugee crisis. For all these reasons, we need a coach who can train staff to identify and address discrimination against Arabs, racism against Palestinians, and Islamophobia. Our community has endured a long history of marginalization, exclusion, and emotional distress, particularly during the ongoing conflict in Gaza, West Bank, and the occupied territories. This lack of acknowledgement and support has led to increased frustration, behavioral issues among students, and a loss of trust in the school support system. Thank you for considering this request. Our students deserve to feel included, supported, and valued within the school environment. I am confident that with the establishment of these positions, we can make significant stride toward a more inclusive and supportive school environment for all students. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Ms. Dabusi? Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. So you have said that you specifically are looking for those positions to be titled Muslim equity coach and an Arabic-speaking equity coach. Would you be opposed to one or either of those positions being called a Palestinian equity coach?
Not necessarily, but I believe that, the Arab community is not only Palestinian. For sure, now the biggest issue is what's going on in Palestine. But I believe Arab equity coach would be maybe more inclusive.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Debussy? And I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much for that. And our next speaker is Gada Kadan in person. Welcome.
Can start now. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm a proud Palestinian Canadian mama, and my 3 kids attended OCDSB schools. I'm here to share some thoughts from my youngest. He's a brilliant grade 10 student whose dreams go beyond the galaxies, as he always says. He hasn't been feeling safe, motivated, or fulfilled, though. In fact, he feels disconnected, betrayed by the school system, and under so much mental and psychological pressure. It's all in the name that he carries and in the kufiya scarf that he has been wearing on and off to school. Like many other Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian kids, my son finds it difficult to breathe the heavy air in the schools. From dirty looks to silencing to crushing emotions, he would always come back home and say, "Mama, they simply cancel us. They don't care about our well-being, our emotions, and our pain." Palestinian students are just trying to do what they can to stand up for their people, and they are being humiliated, censored, and made to feel like their existence is controversial or wrong. This is simply physically and mentally exhausting. When we look at our equity and inclusion policies, we are asking students to bring their whole selves into the school space, to celebrate who they are, to acknowledge and honor their histories and their heritage. But for some reason, when it comes to Palestine, all of this is being silenced. We strongly call on this board to approve the budget allocation for multiple positions of Arab and Palestinian equity coaches to address those serious concerns happening across the board in the OCDSB schools. Those coaches should be seasoned to fully understand the cultural sensitivity, background, and deep impact of the geopolitical global issues on the student communities here at home. Our Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian student population numbers speak for themselves. Many parents have been contemplating and discussing options regarding the current state of affairs at the OCDSB schools. It would be a huge blow to this board if large groups of those parents organize and push to move their kids out of the OCDSB schools. This would mainly be as a result of long-standing frustration with the current policies and lack of support and recognition to the growing needs of this large group of students. Your urgent attention and support to this request is demanded, and our community would extend hundreds of hands to collaborate with the board and the schools to facilitate a better school environment that is fair, inclusive, and safe for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Ms. Kadan?
I see a question on the board. I see
I
someone on
see
the.
a hand up on the screen. Trustee Aziz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me in the room?
We can.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your delegation this evening. I really appreciated the poetic nature in which you expressed the plight of your son. It really hits home for me, and Ramadan Mubarak. I would like to ask, when this motion amendment passes this evening for the equity coaches, you mentioned at the end of your statement that the community would like to extend its arms in collaboration with the board to support additional equity initiatives. If you can think of any in this moment, how else can the board support the Arabic speaking and Muslim and Palestinian members of the school board?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. And thank you for the Ramadan greeting. I really appreciate that. I think given the fact that I'm a community leader here in Ottawa, I live in Barrhaven. I have many connections within the area in Barrhaven in particular. There is a force within the community in Barrhaven of moms and dads who would mobilize, as well as organizations, Muslim and Arab organizations, who can mobilize with the board teams, and we come up with ideas to support both the students and the teachers and the staff at those schools through hosting community events, multiple events. And some of those events could be to cater for the growing demand for mental health services, showing support to the students who have been carrying this massive pain and being forced to go, within the heavy air, like I mentioned about my son, into those schools. They need to be cared for. They need to feel that their voices are heard and then their pain is appreciated and attended to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Kadan? Trustee Bell?
Thank you very much, Ramadan Mubarak. My question is, in the classroom, do you see it very important to say the words Palestine, to reference Palestinians, and to have and facilitate conversations with regard to what is currently happening? Is that one of the recommendations that you're coming forward with?
Yes, absolutely. This is crucial, actually. And just to give you a quick example, my son is taking civics and careers class, for example, this semester. And from day one, the teacher made it clear that any controversial topics will not be allowed in terms of making presentations or involving this in class discussions, including the current ongoing war on Gaza. And the following week, the class would be handed a map, a world map from the same teacher, and they were given names of certain countries to be added or labeled to that map, one of which was Israel. And mind you, in that class, there were multiple Palestinian students, so you can imagine the pain they felt when this assignment was given to them, and they had no choice to. Some of them had to cross out that name, and others, they felt intimidated. They had to fulfill the class requirement and label the countries accordingly, to meet the expectation of the teacher. Also, avoiding this otherness of Palestinian and avoiding bringing up or saying the name Palestine in the classrooms, it further aggravates the pain of Palestinian students and Arab and Muslim students in those schools. I want to bring to your attention here at the board the fact that we have big backing. We're not talking about an isolated group or Palestinian student community. Here in Ottawa at the OCDSB schools, we have backing from the Arab community, from the Muslim communities, from the mainstream communities who have been expressing empathy to us, and this is truly appreciated, but we need to see it reflected in the classrooms in all the schools across the board.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Chair. Would it be possible to get a comment from the director on the permissibility of discussing the events in Gaza and the West Bank for the people that are here today? Thank you.
Trustee Bell, I will ask the director to comment when we have finished hearing from all of the delegations. Right now, I'd like to go to Trustee Kaplan-Murth, who has a question.
Thank you, and thank you for speaking, and Ramadan Mubarak. And I'm very sorry to hear that your children have experienced any form of discrimination and any sense of not belonging in our schools. I would like to ask the same question of the director that was just asked by Trustee Bell, but I'd like to suggest that maybe you can elaborate when you're talking about geopolitical global issues. Is there something specific that has happened that would make your children have felt unsafe any more or less, putting your kind of mind to being a mother of any other child, any child whose country somewhere else in the world is undergoing any kind of war, might also feel distressed? Like, is there something specific that was anti-Muslim or anti-Arab that you're referring to? And then the second part is to ask the director to please speak to why we would talk about geopolitical global issues for Palestine, Israel, but not for all of the other countries in the world, where we know that it puts Israeli and Jewish children also in very uncomfortable situations, as well as Muslim and Arab students. Thank you.
Thank you for both questions. The first one, yes, there are multiple incidents that reflected that racism against Palestinian Muslim students in the OCDSB school. One example I could cite here is how muted the Islamic Heritage Month events were at the OCDSB schools last year. This is a federally proclaimed occasion every year. It's declared across Canada to celebrate the Islamic heritage and the contribution of Muslims to Canadian history. We didn't see much in the schools about that, unfortunately. And I know this coincided with the October 7th events. So everybody read this as something that is related exactly to the events. And that's why maybe the schools or the board opted to just mute it or tune it down with regards to that Islamic Heritage Month. The other example I can give you here is that when the teachers, the history teachers, the civics and careers teachers, the English teachers, they openly say that we will avoid those topics because we don't want to make others feel uncomfortable. What about us? We are the other all the time. So when are we going to get the chance, or our kids get the chance? We believe in freedom of expression. This is in the Charter of Freedoms and Rights and Freedoms here in Canada. So we have to honor that. And the classroom is a catalyst for the country. So I believe these kids, they need to regain their faith and their trust in the system. With regards to, being a mother, as a mother, I believe that every child, every person in this world, they deserve to be safe, and for their history and their heritage and their pain to be acknowledged and appreciated. Out of all countries, this is Canada, and we all know the history of the struggles of the Indigenous people, and we find it directly related to the struggles that historically Palestinians go through. So it is important for us when we want to highlight Gaza, West Bank, Israel conflict in the classrooms, we have to be mindful of the current events. We have to be mindful of the current genocide that's taking place in front of the world's eyes, and it's on full display. You can think of many examples of countries or locations where 13,000 kids have been murdered by the Israeli war machine in Gaza. You can give me any example in any country, in any other conflict zone with the same number of atrocities and loss of life has happened. And you can imagine the impact of this on all the kids, not just Palestinians or Arabs. So this is something worthy for the board to consider. And it is healthy for us to discuss geopolitical issues. And I think the case with Ukraine, for example, was highlighted in the school system. I don't think we had the same airspace for the Palestine issue.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
And we will move on then to our next delegation. And that is Riley McKinnon, who is not yet appeared in the Zoom waiting room. So I will go on to Omar El-Behazi, who is also on Zoom. Good evening. We can't hear you. You're still muted.
Does this sound better?
That's much better. We can hear you and we can see you. So please begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much. My name is Omar El-Bahisi, and I am a parent to a student in OCDSB, as well as a spouse to an OCDSB employee. I felt the need to share my thoughts with you today because I've been hearing some concerning sentiments when it comes to them expressing their Arab-Palestinian identity on the OCDSB properties. My niece was told repeatedly she could not wear symbols resembling anything Palestinian in the classroom or the flag colors. And my wife, being an employee, she said that she heard some not so encouraging statements from some of her colleagues. Now, this is concerning simply because the OCDSB is a public institution funded by taxpayers, and you have an obligation to adhere to the Charter of Human Rights. And the freedom of expression falls under those chartered rights. So if a Palestinian Canadian students feel that they want to express themselves in that manner, they should be allowed to do so. Furthermore, conversations about the ongoing conflict between Palestine and Israel, when they arise in the classroom, We fear that those conversations are not allowed to take place organically or objectively, as they should. We want to see the OCDSB encourage dialogue, as opposed to, the long-standing monologue it's always been, which is favoring Israel's opinions and point of view, and it has been a monologue for the longest time. We want to see that change to become a dialogue, because if we don't allow for dialogue, then how do we expect change? So the OCDSB, I believe, has an obligation to facilitate an equitable workspace.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions for Mr. El-Bahisi? And I am seeing none. So thank you again, and please feel free to watch the rest of the meeting.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And now we go to Yasmin Abu Zaid, who is also on Zoom. And I apologize if I have mispronounced your last name. Good evening.
Hi, sorry, I just want to confirm that you can see and hear me.
We can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, so my name is Yasmin. I'm an emergency supply here at the OCDSB, and I've had the pleasure of doing both my student teacher placements at OCDSB high schools with high Muslim and Arab populations. I'd like to speak tonight to my experience as both a Palestinian Muslim high school student and now as an educator to urge you to reaffirm the need for and amend the motion to create two distinct equity coach titles, one called an Arabic-speaking equity coach and the other called a Muslim equity coach. When I was a high school student, I had a teacher make a comment about how Muslim women were demure and submissive. As a student who frequently spoke in class and took on leadership roles, that comment was deeply hurtful. She also attempted to regularly rescue some of my friends who wore hijab from their households simply because she decided their lack of participation meant that they were oppressed instead of shy or bored in her class. None of us had anyone to go to. An equity coach would have helped. In high school, I rarely identified as Palestinian because I feared the comments, questions, and dehumanization I would get. This is the kind of shame and fear that stays with you as an adult. In fact, when registering for this delegation, I hesitated to identify myself as Palestinian for fear of stereotyping. As an educator, students who share my identity and well-meaning allies frequently come up to me to help them advocate or to ask questions. Just last night, I held a Ramadan iftar and education night for teacher candidates. I received overwhelmingly positive feedback from the attendees, and I had a colleague ask if she could share the slides with her teachers at her practicum school. While I'm grateful that I can be of service, it's troubling that teachers who have just entered the field can already feel that appropriate PD is not given to staff about a practice that 20% of our student population partakes in. Furthermore, the burden should not be on Muslim staff members in school. We are more likely to be young, just entering the profession, and therefore have less time and resources on our hands than our colleagues. I hope that my experience is a testament to the need for these two equity positions. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for your delegation. Are there any questions? Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Yasmin, for your delegation this evening, and Ramadan Mubarak. I hope you're able to break your fast before this meeting this evening. You mentioned PD around things like iftar and Ramadan. When this motion passes to include the Arabic and or Arab identifying and or Muslim and or Palestinian coaches, what else do you think we should include in our PD, if you can think of any right now? If not, please feel free to email or reach out to our appropriate staff members. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I want to reaffirm the fact that these should be separate positions with separate mandates. And part of the reason that it should be separate is that Arab does not equal Muslim and vice versa. And that's something that I think is really important actually for the Muslim equity coach to emphasize to staff members. I feel like there's a lot of confusion around that. So I regularly have a lot of students from Afghanistan who I've been lucky to work with, and other colleagues are surprised they don't speak Arabic, but are Muslim and look Arab. So I think that's a really important part of what the Muslim equity coach should be up to. I think scheduling and prayer is a really big issue right now in our school. It was something that was last night in my iftar presentation to my classmates. It came up very frequently, trying to figure out how do we accommodate as teachers prayer in schools. There's several times where we're not sure if students are taking advantage of certain policies. We're not sure where we're going to find the time, because a 75-minute period, as anyone who's been a teacher knows, it's a time crunch. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our bell schedule, or there's no school policies that are set up appropriately to allow for students to go pray and also maximize their learning. So that to me is very, very important. On the other hand, the Arabic equity coach should be able to identify to staff who is an Arabic speaker. Again, lots of confusion about that. I see staff members who are surprised that Black students can speak Arabic. I see staff members who are surprised that you can be Arab and Christian or Jewish or any other religion. So that's something that needs to be emphasized. We actually held a Addressing Palestine and Israel event at our campus, and we talked a lot about the importance of allowing students of all identities to exist and how we can make people feel welcome. So instead of shying away from this conversation, I think how to facilitate these conversations in the classroom is really, really important. And that's something that the Palestinian equity coach, or sorry, the Arabic speaking equity coach should work on. And Ramadan Mubarak to you too.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your delegation. And Mr. McKinnon has clearly not been able to make it this evening, but we do have his expression of support in writing for equity coaches for Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian students in the OCDSB. And I would now like to ask the director if he has any comment based on what he has heard this evening.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to all the delegates for speaking so genuinely on your perspectives and positions around our work as an organization. There's a few comments I'd like to make, all in the spirit of the OCDSB being a learning-oriented organization. We're continuing to grow and learn, not only around learning and well-being, but around how we interact with one another. And, we continue to along that journey with strengths to celebrate, but also areas of reflection and growth. A couple of comments for the Board of Trustees and our delegates this evening. First and foremost, our practices around culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and practices continue to evolve over time. I think a great example from our most recent speaker around scheduling prayer and making accommodations, religious accommodations continues to evolve and grow, and we look for opportunities to do that to meet the needs of our learners first and foremost. I think it's a valid point that's raised. But also a comment earlier by one of the delegates around what we call the scope and sequence of the curriculum, how we diversify the curriculum, the expectations, not so much the expectations as they're written, but the links we make to it that are meaningful, that are more globally oriented and not necessarily Eurocentric or other. So I think that's also a work in progress for us as an organization. The other point I wanted to make with respect to our practices and our pedagogy is we do indeed share memoranda of diversity on various fronts. Islamic Heritage Month in October, Black History Month in February, Pride Month in June, and also Holocaust education are just a few examples of some of the ways we reach out to our system. And I understand the concern on the part of the delegates this evening that depending on the circumstances locally and globally, that can play out in different ways in our schools and in our system. So I appreciate the comments made, take it to heart, and I will turn it over to Superintendent Farish for any additional comments from the equity team. But the final comment I wanted to make, in the spirit of that context, the fact that there's one set of human rights through the Ontario Human Rights Code, not multiple, and that we are on a delicate balance, a continuum that looks to honor freedom of expression and identity while balancing where there can be harm and hurt in others is not easy for us as an organization. We're looking to do our best. We're looking to learn and grow. The notion of other depends so much on the context that any one of our students and our staff or our school communities find themselves in. And so just a commitment on the part of myself as director on behalf of all of staff that we're working diligently to try and meet the needs of our learners. We're learning and growing. We make mistakes. We have to own those mistakes, but we also look to improve on them into the future. And I think we had delegates tonight that give me a lot of hope that we can work together as one organizational community to meet the needs of all and to respect all. So I'll turn it over to our superintendent for any other.
Thank you, Director Buffoni, through you, Chair. You said it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, for those comments. And now we will move on to confirmation of the minutes of our board meeting on the 27th of February, 2024, and our special board meeting on the 5th of March, 2024. Would someone like to move confirmation of both those sets of minutes? Trustee Lyra, seconded by Trustee Dixon. Are there any errors or omissions in either of these reports? Seeing none, I will call the question on confirming the minutes. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Is there any business arising from either of these sets of minutes? Seeing none, we will go on then to the next item of business, 11.2 on our agenda, receipt of the Committee of the Whole report from the 5th of March, 2024. Vice Chair Milburn.
I will now move receipt of the March 5th, 2024 Committee of the Whole reports.
Seconded by Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Any errors or omissions in this report? Seeing none, I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed, and that motion is carried. Trustee Milburn?
On a motion by Trustee Lyra, which I will second, that the OCDSB assert that it supports a legislative ban on advertisements for gambling in Canada in all media, and that the chair sends a letter to local members of parliament, members of provincial parliament, and provincial and federal political leaders to advocate that legislation be enacted to ban advertising for gambling in all media.
And is this a consent item? I'm seeing no objection. So we will deal with it when we get to consent items. Trustee Milburn.
On a motion by Trustee Aziz, which I will second, that the chair write to the Minister of Education on behalf of the board requesting that the ministry ensure menstrual products are procured, distributed, and accessible for all Ontario schools on an ongoing basis, free of additional charges to individual boards.
And so that again, is this a consent item? And I see no objection. So we will deal with it shortly. Anything else in your report, Vice Chair Milburn?
That's all at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to receipt of the report from Committee of the Whole Budget on the 19th of March. Trustee Lyra.
I would now like to remove receipt of the 19th of March, 2024 Committee of the Whole Budget Report.
Seconded by Trustee Lee. Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions of clarification regarding the minutes, because I don't see the amendment in the minutes that are shared, or in the approval of academic staffing, or in the any of the appendix. I see them in the post-meeting minutes, though. If I could kindly ask for clarification as to where those would be for the public to see as well.
Sorry, Madam Chair, could the trustee repeat where she doesn't see them?
I'm asking where they can be found. In the public version, I don't see I see the post-meeting minutes. that's great, but I don't see the amendment reflected in the appendix or in any of the appendices.
The amendment wouldn't be reflected until the board has approved it.
Okay. So once the board, so just so everybody, yes, okay, thank you. And then when I go back to the language of the 2 FTE positions that were approved, the title of those 2 resources will be whether it be Arab and or Arabic speaking and or Muslim and or Palestinian equity coaches. Can I get confirmation from staff that those 2 positions will be equity coaches?
Mr.
A couple of
Director.
things, oh, sorry. A couple of things we can clarify about the minute process for the trustee and then to the content pieces. And so for the minutes where we reflected the language of the motion, because the motion didn't amend the total number. So what we've done is we've made a notation on the addendum. We don't actually go back and repost the report. It doesn't come back, but in the minutes it's reflected, and in the addendum to the report, there's a notation on the addendum, and that will be filed with the minutes. And so that's the way it's captured so that it can be seen going forward. Okay, so that's on the first piece. On the second piece, we've noted it on the summary table on the addendum. And that addendum includes only academic staffing. And so it is in reference to the section that references instructional coaches, although I'm not certain in the conversation that was held last week that there was, well, let me frame it this way. I think in the conversation last week, there were a number of perspectives about the services and supports that were needed. And my understanding from the conversation was that the resources would be allocated to cover the areas identified, but we weren't necessarily getting into the specificity of the role, but rather providing the services based on student need and resourcing.
Anything further, Trustee Aziz?
Yes, so the 2 resources provided, other than equity coach, what could the other resource that was approved in academic staffing be classified as, if it's not an equity coach?
Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I will turn this one over to Superintendent Farish. Just a comment that the notion of the motion being resources reflected the nature of the conversation, that some of the supports unquestionably would be directly in the teaching and learning environment of our classrooms, no question, but also additional reports that tie to the community. And that's where some of the positions may be instructional coaches, but might also be other resources that are not directly tied to academic staffing, but the overall budget. But I'll turn it over to Superintendent Farish just to give a couple of greater specificity to the nature of the resources, coaching or other.
Thank you, Director, and through you, Chair. Trustee Aziz, thanks for the question, just to make sure we're all understanding what we're talking about. I think it's really important. And the nomenclature that we use in the equity team or the equity department isn't something that's common language per se. So it's really important that you know where we're coming from in terms of the way that we do the work within the equity team and the different roles and what we call those roles. So within the academic budget, staffing budget, we don't have any other roles that would be relevant to an allocation if you were to decide to allocate budget through academic staffing. I believe that the delegations came to talk about this topic, and we engaged in the topic, and we engaged in the conversation in a really fulsome way, and it got into more of a conversation about how we work as a team and the way that the different roles that we have really blend nicely to bring, when we need it, the very specific and contextualized, nuanced knowledges and perspectives and the critical, and it will be ongoing always, the critical methodology of working with community, because there will be different, as the landscape changes and as we move through the different ways that students are experiencing global events and the nature of those experiences, we never just rely on the collective of bodies that we have on the team. We would be looking to always engage with authentic own voices in the community and community leaders, such as who we heard from this evening, in fact, and made a very good connection myself to one of the delegations that I'll follow up on in terms of community leadership for Palestinian Canadians. So I think Trustee Aziz, you're right to ask if in this budget conversation for academic staffing, it would be the coach role. I do want to really expand on the fact that the conversation took us in a really, I felt, fruitful way, because we could look at the other roles that we have on the team and also other opportunities when we get to non-academic staffing. And those roles, we refer to those roles as student support coordinators. So we do have 2 Muslim student support coordinators on our team, and one of those Muslim student support coordinators speaks Arabic. And so I'm sorry for a lot of confusion about the makeup of the team, but I hope that was helpful.
Okay, thank you. And just so that
Trustee Aziz, I'm going to ask, stop there, because we really are on errors or omissions in the report from Budget Committee of the Whole. We are not yet into the report itself. We have to decide whether or not the report accurately records what happened at the meeting. So if you have further questions, perhaps you will have an opportunity to ask them afterwards. Trustee Bell, errors or omissions?
Yes, just to clarify, I was also under the impression that we approved as a board of trustees 2 equity coaches, one which would be Arab speaking and one which would be Muslim. And so if that's not what is reflected in the minutes, then I do not believe that they reflect what happened. Thanks.
The amendment that is recorded at the bottom of page 6 is what we approved, which said that the report 24-018 be revised to reflect the commitment of 2.0 FTE resources to support students who identify as Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, and/or Arabic speaking. And that is the language that we did vote on and approve. So that is what we will be dealing with when we come to approve the recommendation from Budget Committee of the Whole this evening. So if there are no other errors or omissions questions, then I would like to call the question on receipt of this report. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Back to you, Trustee Lyra.
On a motion by Trustee Lee, which I will second, that the academic staffing plan for 2024-2025, as set out in Appendum and Appendices A, B, C to Report 24-018, be approved, subject to adjustments related to fluctuations in projected and actual enrollment as amended.
And is this a consent item? And I'm seeing that it is not, so we will deal with it after when we come to non-consent items. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask a question. You just concluded the last conversation by saying that motion is approved, but I think you were saying that the minutes were approved.
In the
correct?
minutes, the committee approved it.
Okay, but were you just
But the
asking
board
us?
has not approved it.
But you just asked us to raise our hands to, I think, approve the minutes. Am I?
All we were doing was confirming the minutes.
I just wanted to, because you said the motion. Okay, thank you.
And so this is the motion and it is non-consent and we will deal with it shortly. And if I can just get my agenda back. So Is there anything else in your report, trustee Lyra?
There is not.
Thank you. So that brings us to the vote on the consent items from the 5th of March. We have 2 recommendations there, and I will ask Manager Guthrie.
Madam Chair,
please.
could I have separate votes on this?
Separate votes on the two recommendations?
This is the 2 letters, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will deal first with the motion regarding a letter in support of a legislative ban.
These are consent items. I don't know if it's.
They are consent items, but that does not mean that everybody would vote the same way on all of them. It just means we're not going to debate them.
I see.
And so the first one is the one regarding the legislative ban on advertisements for gambling. And if we can have that in e-scribe. And the motion is carried, 9 in favor, 2 opposed. And the other one now with regard to the ministry ensuring menstrual products are procured, distributed, and accessible for all Ontario schools on an ongoing basis, free of additional charges to individual boards. And this motion is carried unanimously, 11 in favor, none opposed. And I would note again that this is a motion that originated with our student trustees. So
Point of order, Madam Chair.
go ahead.
I would like an apology from Trustee Blackfern for making disparaging comments. She's making disparaging comments under her breath while the mic is not on, and I'd like an apology.
Trustee Blackburn.
I did not direct any disparaging comments towards Trustee Evans.
She was making disparaging comments about me, and for that I would like an apology. Whether or not they were directed to me, I think is immaterial.
I did not do that, Madam Chair.
There seems to be a disagreement. I did not hear any comments from over in that direction, so I can't speak to it. It's one person against the other, and I have no way of resolving this. So I would suggest you have a conversation afterwards. The remarks that were made were not made within public hearing, unless there's a microphone hidden over there that I don't know about. So moving on then with our agenda, and I will ask that people please refrain from making extraneous comments or texting while we are trying to get through the business of the board. So the next item is the non-consent items, and that brings us to the academic staffing motion from Budget Committee of the Whole. Trustee Lee, would you like introduction?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to reiterate what I had said previously during our Committee of the Whole meeting, I hope all my colleagues will support the motion as it is, without adding any further costs to the academic staff, and given that we don't have the GSNs and we don't know how much fluidity we'll have in the second half of the budget process.
And just reminding Trustee Lyra, did you second the motion previously? And if you did not, would you do that please now?
Yes, I will say, I believe I said that I would second it.
Thank you. So in terms of speakers to this motion, I do not have a list at the moment. Trustee Lyra and then Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
All right. I would like to propose an amendment. If Manager Guthrie could please put it on the screen. If I still have the floor. So as we discussed at the Committee of the Whole budget, there are 4 schools that we have on our RAISE index, which is the lowest socioeconomic schools in our system, who do not have vice principal allocations. In academic staffing, it is appropriate, because we do all of our VP and staffing allocations, to put a motion on the floor to add a half VP to all of those schools to ensure that they have the administrative support necessary for supporting those students. As we all know, students in high needs areas are going to have high needs. And a principal who has perhaps fewer students than another school would still have additional work to do, because those students are going to be, because it is a raised school, more work. And so to support our administrators and to make sure that all of our schools, and particularly our schools in low-income areas, are able to support our students to their fullest capacity, I am moving that we add a half VP to all of our schools in low-income areas that do not currently have any sort of vice principal support. The cost to this would be approximately $263,700. And because this was debated at Committee of the Whole budget, I would encourage all of my colleagues to have reconsidered in the interim and support this motion. Thank you.
And do we have a seconder for this amendment? Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Speakers to the amendment. Trustee Bell.
I would like to thank Trustee Lyra for bringing this recommendation forward. In my visits to my schools, and in particular to the raised school that is in my neighborhood, it became abundantly clear that the principal is dealing with a lot more than the average elementary school, and she is doing so without the help of a VP. I think this this recommendation will be very helpful to a school in my zone that has significant needs when it comes to new immigrants, when it comes to students who do not have English as their first language. And it will make a real difference in the lives of many of the special education students that also attend that school. I have heard that principals are working from the wee hours of the morning in these raised schools until late in the evening. If they had the time of a part-time VP, they would be able to live much more healthy lives, which benefit our students. And so for that reason, I will definitely be supporting this, and I'm very grateful to Trustee Evans for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Trustee Bella. Are there other speakers to the proposed amendment? Trustee Dixon.
Through you, Chair. I guess I just want clarification. Don't we have within the schools where a teacher is also acting as VP and we have the main, like the principal? I just need a little bit more clarification on this.
Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll allow our Associate Director Reynolds to start the conversation and I'll continue along.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I think I'm assuming what the trustee might be referring to is the administrative designate, which is a teacher that is given a stipend and then would replace the principal on occasions where the principal's not in the building. That's where we would have a teacher step into an administrative type role, other than where a vice principal is out and maybe a teacher's been appointed acting for some time. But all single administrative schools do have an administrative designate, but they are primarily there to teach, but do backfill behind the principal when they are absent, if that's what you were referring to.
Trustee Dixon.
And one more question, please, Chair. When it comes to assigning a vice principal, what's the number of students that is needed to be able to assign a vice principal? Just for clarification.
Thanks. So we don't have a number that we use. We typically do look to our larger schools first for more allocation, but we have some small schools that are identified as higher needs that have a greater vice principal allocation than some larger schools. So we really do try to look at the school as a whole, the programming, the students that are there, how many students are identified with a certain exceptionality that may require more support, how many kindergarten students. We look at a large number of factors where they fall on the RAISE index before we appoint or decide what the vice principal allocation. So we do see, for the most part, certain schools have vice principals year over year, but sometimes there is some movement. For example, one of the RAISE schools that presently doesn't have one has grown in numbers, and the SOI has identified that as a priority school. So we're going to see once we finalize staffing if we can, that school might acquire a vice principal through the normal process where and another school may lose as they drop. So a lot of factors. I know it's a complicated answer, but we look at a lot of variables.
Thank you.
Director.
Madam Chair, just to add to Associate Director Reynolds' comments, there are other factors as well that the district takes into consideration, staff, including the early developmental index, which is a real indicator of some of the socioeconomic factors, for instance, beyond RAISE itself, and actually as an element of RAISE, so to speak, as indices, but also other supports. Might be additional EA support, could be additional learning resource support, for instance, beyond solely vice principalship. And just a comment for the Board of Trustees so that they're aware. It's our intention as senior staff to ensure in our leadership development and succession planning that our principals are providing opportunities for our vice principals to grow and be ready to become principals, not to section off roles and responsibilities so tightly that a vice principal would deal only with discipline, but not with scheduling, because that doesn't then provide the kind of leadership opportunity for that vice principal when they become a principal to have had varied experiences. So our goal as senior staff is to ensure succession planning that varies that work as a team, where the principal picks up some discipline, the vice principal picks up some discipline along with other things. And I understand full well and respect that there was once a more traditional view that the VP deals with discipline and the P deals with other things. We're trying not to have that in preparation for those vice principals, which in our times right now step up into principal roles fairly quickly. So I wanted to make that delineation as well, that we're looking for a team approach where principals and vice principals exist. Thank you.
Trustee Dixon.
Sorry, one last question. So in a school that might need 2 EAs, having a VP could take away from us putting into two TAs to actually. I just want a little bit more clarification in the sense of having a VP and a principal. What is it going to be taken away from our staffing for the students that do need the need?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Dixon's question is a good one. It's not an exact formula where 1 VP would equal 2 As. It depends on what those schools identify through their superintendents as their actual need, for 2 reasons. One, the collectively bargained agreements on roles and responsibilities don't equate that way, although vice principal can often help with the assistance of a student, and an educational assistant can also help in a student not making their way through to additional administrative support. There's a team approach, but it's not an equating factor for consideration. So there are roles and responsibilities delineated, and that's where really as schools identify their needs, sometimes it is a vice principal, no question, and staff takes that into consideration, but sometimes it's another need, and we want to make sure we don't get into role confusion, where we've put a vice principal in trying to act as an educational assistant for a number of reasons beyond their identified roles and responsibilities. So that's part of what Associate Director Reynolds is speaking about, looking at the entire array of supports and positions for schools to try and map out where additional administrative support happens and where other supports are put into place.
Thank you.
And next on my list, I have Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I'm hoping for maybe a comment from the Associate Director, maybe the Director, in regards to teachers being given the administration allocation. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact word to step in for principals. I'm concerned about that eating into already quite precarious prep time for our teachers in the instances where they are asked to take on that sort of principal role. And I'm concerned that if we don't have the necessary supports, that's going to, if in a school, let's say, for example, a principal is working with the students very closely, as in many of the schools in my zone where I know that happens. If a teacher is stepping into the role of a principal or an administrator, that's really cutting into their time. And I'm concerned about that becoming more of a normal practice as our board grows and as we have higher enrollments and higher needs from our students. So I think that's something for us all to consider as we think about supporting or not supporting this motion as well.
And I think we go back to the Associate Director.
Great, thank you, and through you, Chair. So an administrative designate is a voluntary position. We don't just identify someone, and so we have run into situations where maybe on a particular staff we didn't have one, and we had to come up with a different plan for backfilling. But in addition to that, we make arrangements for any missed prep time to be made up. And these can be valuable roles for staff. That some staff just kind of enjoy the change in pace. It's not many days throughout the year typically. But it also is a good opportunity to try on certain aspects of the administration role. So we do see it also as part of our overall succession planning and leadership development, but it is voluntary, and, we do work with individual designates. If it's becoming too much, we make it, we work with them. We don't want it to be a burden.
Trustee Blackburn next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, since we're debating this for a second time, I would like to hear the views of the CFO again, please. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So I think that the approval of this addition would put a financial pressure on the second part of the budget process, and those what might need to be reduced could be of a higher priority than the 4 positions you're considering today. It's still too early to really know what our financial allocation will be. But looking how the budget dropped today and the numbers in that don't give me great hope that we're going to receive any financial flexibility that we weren't already anticipating. And so I think we're probably in a position where this could potentially lead to cuts or reductions, because we know we're under inflationary pressure. We know Bill C-124 will create pressure on just continuing to deliver the same services that we're delivering today. So I do think there is a risk of spending this money early. I do understand that this is part of the academic staffing process, and this is when this should be considered, but we do have a VP pot allocation already. Staff already have a process for making sure that the highest needs are identified with the resources that are available. They do feel that in the staff recommended budget, they have the flexibility to address the needs that they identify. And I don't think as a board, we're in a position to take extra risk in these areas at this point in time, because we've expended the flexibility that we would have to take this kind of risk by not having the accumulated surplus to back us up. So Again, I do believe that this could lead to cuts that we didn't anticipate because we approved too much in this part of the budget process.
Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, and thank you to the CFO for that answer. So my position remains the same. It is my view that as a board, we should respect what the staff have told us. It is my view that we risk cutting much needed supports that are available to a greater number of students, like social workers, educational assistants, perhaps psychologists, these types of positions, which are very, very important, which have a specific expertise that we don't have enough of, and we certainly don't want to have any more cuts in these areas. In addition, I think it would be highly inappropriate and unfair. And let's not forget, my colleagues, there is poverty throughout our district, whether or not a school happens to be on the RAISE index. I can tell you there are families in Barrhaven who are struggling at this time and have great need. So what I would prefer, as I've stated many, many times over the years, this is the beginning of the process, of the budget process. It is not the end. Staff do have the capacity to add things if they see fit. If the superintendents of these schools bring to the attention of the associate directors and the director of education a very dire need, I am quite confident that that dire need would be met. In my opinion, it isn't appropriate for us to add close to $265,000 to the budget at this time and point. I think the cost benefit analysis, the cost is too heavy. The benefit is not enough. If you have a school of less than 200 students, and I have schools with 4 or 5 times 6 that amount, to have a full-time principal and a part-time vice principal, it's just patently, in my view, in my opinion, unfair. And so I would ask respectfully that my colleagues not support this at this time, and trust in what our staff are saying. Our financial situation is not good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. I'll now go to Trustee Kaplan-Murth with apologies for overlooking you because I thought all you wanted to do was second the motion at the time.
No, I actually had my
And
hand
I
up at the
still
very-
have you on my
very
list
beginning.
for the main motion.
Oh, okay, okay. That's actually part of what I wanted to ask, if we're only talking to this motion or if we're going to go back and speak to the other motion. Okay, so on this, which kind of relates actually to a question that I have on the main motion, is if we're concerned that we don't have the 2.0 full-time equivalent for allocating to raise schools, then my question is, how exactly did you justify that you'd have 2.0 FTE resources given to an Arabic speaking and Muslim equity coach, given that disproportionate number of hate-based and I suppose incidents in our schools are affecting other students. So why do we need, like, if we don't have, if what we're hearing from the CFO is that we don't have the resources to allocate to the raised schools, then perhaps we need to go back to that question of why are we putting 2.0 positions into the Arabic speaking and Muslim students, as opposed to 1, which is what Jewish students have, which is what LGBTQ students have, and so on, where they are disproportionately much more targeted in our schools, and much smaller populations, granted, but much more targeted. So is all of this open for further discussion, or is that a done deal?
Right now, all we're discussing is this particular amendment. It's the floor will still be open for other amendments when we have made a decision on this amendment. And I will ask the director if he could please clarify with regard to the fact that we are not adding resources on the other, and that we are doing that within existing resources. This particular amendment would add positions. Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's my understanding, yes.
Anything further, Trustee Kaplan-Murthy?
Nope, that's fine. Thank you.
Moving on then to Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank staff for the continued hard work on the budget, and I truly, truly appreciate the intent of the mover of this motion. As we see tighter budget allocation from the province for education, we will continue to ask our staff to create the best case with fewer resources. And I suspect we'll be having harder conversations like this every year, which really does sadden me. And I want to, again, thank staff for their hard work. After hearing the responses from staff and conversations with my community and so on, I am struggling to see how additional VP allocations are necessarily what is needed in these schools. It's with a really heavy heart that I say that, because I do have schools in my zones that I know want vice principals, but I'm really worried a motion like this is going to reduce our ability to adjust much needed support further down the budgetary process when we get to non-academic staffing. I will say I would love if the province would give us more money for education. It would be great for all of our schools. And I'm really sorry to the mover of this motion. I appreciate your intent, but I cannot support it right now. I'm not saying no forever. I'm saying no for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. This was actually a hand to speak to the main motion on the floor.
So I've added you to the main motion list. Trustee Nash. Or sorry, did you want to speak to this?
No, you're welcome to move to Trustee Nash.
Trustee Nash.
Yes, and thank you. I just wanted to add, last year there in one of my particular schools, there was continuing concerns in certain areas, and I was very pleased that an additional VP was added. So I come back to, leaving it to our superintendents and senior staff to look at what is needed. And I've had fulsome discussions with my superintendents. I have actually, I'm very lucky, I have 4 superintendents, but on a regular basis, we discuss different schools and what the needs are and how best to address them. And so again, last year, not because of the numbers increase in the school, but because of certain issues, and a VP was added. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Nash. I have no more speakers on my list. I'm going to ask Vice Chair Milburn if she would mind taking the chair, please.
I would be happy to. Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate the intent of this particular motion. However, when I consider the range of schools which have no vice principal and are served by administrative designates, I have to think about the range of needs that is also represented among those schools. There are some schools which are considerably larger that have no vice principal. There are some schools that are not that far away from being in the group of schools designated as receiving additional support that have no vice principal. And certainly in my own zone, there are 3 schools that have no vice principal. And while the overall area certainly does not qualify them as falling in the right space for additional resources on the RAISE index, these are schools that are remote from emergency services and that have a multitude of their students served by buses, and that often have a number of high needs students because parents do not want their children to be bused for an extended distance to get to special education, specialized classes. So the needs are different, but that doesn't mean the needs are not great. And yet these schools are functioning very well with administrative designates filling in when the principal is unavoidably absent. So when I look at the range of additional resources that we provide to various schools for extremely good reasons, and see that some schools do not have a vice principal allocation, I have to believe that staff have in fact considered all of the different factors that go into determining the extent of the need. And if we have schools that do not have vice principals, I do not know whether these particular elementary schools that are referenced in this motion would necessarily be next on the list in terms of need if we had additional vice principals. So I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Apologies. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we're back to Trustee Lyra for wrap up on her amendment.
Thank you. So I would like us to consider for a moment that we do have an equitable hiring policy. And one of the things that our equitable hiring policy does is try and make sure that we have a leadership position team that reflects the identities of our student population. We have an existing complement of principals and vice principals. And if we want to see more of our principals and vice principals reflect our student population, adding additional new positions means that there are now positions that people can move into to reflect the identities of our student population. Because there are going to be teachers who would like to be vice principals, but for whom there is not yet a position to be a vice principal. This creates an opportunity for people of identities reflective of our student body to take leadership positions in our system. And I don't know if that's been thoroughly considered by all members of the board. I understand that this might not pass, and I understand that it has the potential to bind our hands a little bit in the next section, but as has been mentioned, it is most appropriately placed here. I don't want to see us get to non-academic staffing, the other half of our budget, in a couple of months and think, oh, I wish we had the ability to go back and add these positions, because I want to see students in low-income neighborhoods supported. We all do. I think this motion would support that. And I want to see our leadership teams reflect the identities of our students. And so for these reasons, and for all the ones that we have discussed, I would encourage my colleagues to support this motion. But if it doesn't pass, you win some, you lose some. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. So I would like to call the question. All those in favor of this amendment, please raise your hands.
Can we not get this on eScribe?
An amendment, no one has requested a recorded
Sorry,
vote.
I would like
so
a
I'm
recorded
calling the
vote.
question without a recorded vote.
Madam
Because-
Chair, I would like a recorded vote. I was under the impression it was going to be on eScribe.
If you're going to ask for a recorded vote, you should do that before the question is called. So could we do this on eScribe?
Chair Scott, I am on virtually and I'll have to give my verbal response.
Well, just give us a second until we actually have the motion on the screen here in the boardroom. Trustee
right.
Jenkins.
Thank you.
And you will see that the title of this is not quite the right, but the actual recommendation is indeed the amendment, which is in front of us. So please submit your votes. And Trustee Jenkins,
Not in favor?
thank you. And the amendment is defeated, 3 in favor, 9 opposed, no abstentions. So that brings us back to the main motion, and the next person on my list for the main motion is Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Madam Chair, do I not still have time?
Oh, sorry about that, Trustee Larry. Yes, you do still have some time.
So I would like to encourage all of my colleagues to support the amended motion. It is of the utmost importance that we pass a academic staffing 2024-2025 budget. And so there are many things in this budget that I am fond of, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. And I do regret that I was not able to be present for the initial conversation about these amendments. However, I bring your attention to the school climate survey of 2023 from our own board, which reports that Muslim students identified more favorably than the district in terms of their experiences, their representation, and their experiences of bullying. Whereas Jewish students had significantly lower ratings in representation. Unfortunately, we don't collect good identity data yet about hate-based incidents in our schools, which we will hopefully address. However, that is what our climate survey indicated. And we know from the Ottawa Police that in the 2023 year, there were 36 incidents of Jewish people in Ottawa being targeted, 32 to LGBTQIA, 30 Blacks incidents, 8 Chinese, and only 7 Muslim. So my question, which I've raised before, is why are we allocating 2.0 staffing to address Muslim and Arabic speaking equity coaches? It's disproportionate. It doesn't make any sense. I do acknowledge that in Ottawa, we have a population of 40,000 people who identify as Muslim, and we only have a population of 15,000 who identify as Jewish. But again, 36 incidents of hate against Jews and 7 in Muslim, and our own reporting says that Muslim students have not expressed in the 2023 year dissatisfaction with their representation or with their sense of experiences of being bullied. Compared to the district, they've actually been better off. Now, I 100% support having an Arabic speaking and Muslim equity coach. I think it's really important that no student should ever experience any form of discrimination. And so whether it's 7 incidents or 36 incidents, it shouldn't happen. And so I do support having that equity coach, but I would ask that we amend that back to being 1. It doesn't make sense for it to be 2. There is no justification for it. And that would be one amendment. And my second question is the wording, because it's not clear to me in the wording from the minutes. It says a resource supporting students who identify as Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, and Arabic speaking. But are we approving here that it would be specifically an Arabic speaking equity coach and also somebody, and I think it can be one person who could potentially be Arabic speaking and also address Muslim identity. And if that, whatever the wording is, I do not think that it should say specifically for students who identify as Palestinian. We are not taking on global political issues here. I am Israeli. There are Jews in our schools and Israelis in our schools who need to also feel safe in order for all students, all staff, and everybody in the OCDSB community to feel safe. We're not going to start taking positions on Gaza and Israel. So if we're going to have that equity coach, it should be to represent students who are Arabic speaking and Muslim. The same as we have an equity coach to represent Jewish students, not Israelis. And we have an equity coach to support Black students, not where people are from, etc.
Trustee Kaplan-Murth, I'm going to interrupt you because you're talking about two different amendments. We only deal with amendments one at a time.
Well, I'm not sure if the second one's an amendment because I don't know if this is the actual language. That's what I'm asking. Is this the actual language? Because we've talked about two different things.
And the actual language would be included.
If that's the actual
You're
language.
seeing it, that is the actual language that you're seeing on the screen.
Okay, so then I would ask, and it's also not forward thinking to say Palestinian. You don't know what geopolitical issues there will be.
Well, how about before we get into the debate, you put your first amendment forward and then we'll see if it's
Okay, well,
seconded.
I'll make the first amendment to strike Palestinian from that list and say specifically to support students who are Arabic speaking and identify as Muslim.
So just give staff a second here to get that up. And I think that actually we might take a recess at this point, a 5-minute recess, which will give staff time to sort out the language and give other people a chance to get up and stretch, since we would be doing that at 9 o'clock, and then it won't interrupt the debate on the amendment. The recess, would board members please take their seats now? Please take your seats again now. And if you're online, please signify that you are in fact back with us. I can see Alicia, but I can't see anybody else who's online. And there's Justine. So I would like to call our board meeting back to order. And we have the First Amendment proposed by Trustee Kaplan-Murth is on the screen. You will see the lettering there in purple, the words that are replacing and the words that would be struck out. So before we go back to Trustee Kaplan-Murth, I will ask if there is a seconder for this amendment. Is there a seconder for this amendment? And I am not seeing a seconder. So the amendment fails for want of a seconder. And that means there's no debate on it.
So I can go on then?
That one's gone.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is what Jews around the world have said is anti-Semitism. What we're talking about here is whether or not it is appropriate to have additional resources put towards something that is specifically a geopolitical issue that we would not do for any other country. That is not to say that it's okay to have any form of discrimination against Muslim students or Arabic-speaking students. But it is to say that right now, what's happening between Israel and Gaza, and we don't have to like the politics of any of it, but what is happening right now should not be the basis of our funding decisions as a publicly funded school board. I think Minister Lecce would agree with that.
Point of order, Chair.
Trustee Bell, is that you?
Yes, it is. My point of order has to do with saying that supporting Palestinian students as anti-Semitic is not only incorrect, but I find inflammatory and disrespectful and hurtful to communities. So I would like it to be struck from the record, or I'd like, in better words, I would like Trustee Kaplan-Murth to withdraw. Thank you. And
Trustee Bell, that's not what I meant. And I apologize if that's how you interpreted what I've just said. I'm not saying that supporting Palestinian identifying students in Ottawa is anti-Semitic. What I'm saying is that insisting on having a 2.0 funding allocated to students who specifically identify as Palestinian is anti-Semitic when we don't have a 1.0 for students who specifically identify as Israeli, or a 1.0 for students who specifically identify as Russian or Ukrainian or any other geopolitical situation. We don't, have a support system in place for any other group whose countries we do or do not agree with. Whereas it is appropriate to have a support in place for students who identify as Muslim and Arabic speaking. it is absolutely essential that every student feel safe based on who they are in our schools. And I stand by that. But we are being extremely short-sighted if we're going to tie this to what's happening in a geopolitical situation now.
Trustee Kaplan-Murth, I think you have clarified your remarks sufficiently for Trustee Bell, but you did have another amendment that you wish to propose.
Yes.
And so you should propose it.
Okay, so the second amendment is that it should not be a 2.0 position. We have no justification for it. There is no data to support it. Our own data says that Muslim and Arabic speaking students in our district are disproportionately happier than the rest of the district. So to have allocated a 2.0 position to a group of students who have themselves reported contentment and a lack of bullying post October 7th is a political statement, not something based on fact. So if we have students who need supports, then they should have an equity coach, and that should be a 1.0 position, the same as it is for Black and Jewish and 2S LGBTQ students.
So your amendment then is to change 2.0 to 1.0.
Yeah, or to hear justification for why it would be 2.0. But
All we need is the language of the amendment right now.
Yeah,
which
no,
is to
Nicole
change
has it. It's
2.0 to
1.0.
1.0.
Mhm.
And my question then is there a seconder for this amendment? And I'm looking around the room. Trustee Lyra?
I will second so that we can have a debate.
So we have that seconded by Trustee Lyra.
Point of order, Chair. Point of
Trustee
order.
Bell?
I believe this was already debated at the last meeting, and from my understanding, once it's already been debated, this exact same clause, it should not be debated again. Is that correct?
It was debated in committee. It could not be debated a second time in committee. However, we are now at board, and yes, it can be raised again. So it is in order.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So did you have any further introduction? I think you're
The introduction,
out of time.
the introduction is to reiterate that while there is a population of 40,000 Muslim identifying Ottawans, there are, according to the Ottawa Police, only 7 incidents in our entire city. And according to our own student climate survey of 2023, those Muslim students who identified reported more favorable experiences and less bullying than other students in the district overall. And so how can we possibly justify having a 2.0 allocation for one group of students? And there are other groups of students who also need supports.
Thank you. And I have a solid speakers list here, beginning with Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. At our committee meeting last week, where we had this discussion, Superintendent Farish staff determined that the 2.0 positions were possible because these opportunities were already within, we're not hiring a brand new person. These positions would be taken from within what already is available. So I wonder if staff could just remind us that conversation from committee meeting.
Through you, Madam Chair, and again, I'll look to Superintendent Farish if there's anything I missed here of importance. Just to Trustee Jenkins' point, staff rotate in and out of positions each and every school year in terms of instructional coach or other positions. The senior staff looks to ensure that there's a balance of new and experienced individuals, talented educators, and other staff in those positions to make sure that we're always getting new ideas coming from the classroom and back into the classroom. As the trustee had mentioned, it's staff's intention, understanding that there's a a need here to address that will look within the existing contingency to complement the entire team so that it functions as a team and not as individuals. It's impossible for any one individual to do this work. We've got to be working as a team with the community. That's the intent of staff, and staff will look to make sure there's balance on the team within the positions represented. Turn it over to the superintendent for any other comments.
None required. Thank you.
Trustee Jennings, anything further?
Thank you, Director, for that follow-up. So again, I think this opportunity is unique in the sense that we are, if we had to hire a brand new person to fill this role, it probably would have been a 1.0 staffing position, but this is a unique opportunity, which is why we are able to offer 2.0. And I do think there is a need based on the delegations this evening. So I am supportive of the 2.0. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on then to Trustee Lyra.
Okay. So I will not be supporting the amendment, but I felt like the mover deserved an answer to the question, why two? So the largest Muslim country in the world by population is Indonesia. Indonesia is not an Arabic-speaking country. There are many Muslim nations, Muslim peoples in sub-Saharan Africa. There are Muslim peoples in parts of the world that are not Arabic-speaking. And so I don't agree with the conflation that all Arabic speakers are Muslim or that all Muslims are Arabic speakers. And so I appreciate the nuance of having two people, one who can speak to issues of Islamophobia and one who can speak to issues of anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian racism. And so for those reasons, I am happy to support the two positions because I believe that they are separate populations, or they're not inherently guaranteed to be the same population. And for those reasons, I'm going to support the motion as it originally stood. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on then to Trustee Bell.
Lagging hand, I'm sorry, Chair.
In that case, Trustee Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. I guess since I sort of started this, and since we've come to the conclusion of two, I just wanted to go back to what I had originally sent out to Mary Jane and to Nicole when I had started this idea, because it's been over a year that I've been working on this. And so our district prides itself on offering identity-specific supports for various groups, including Indigenous, Black, Jews, and 2 LGBTQ students. Their supports are instrumental in fostering an environment of equity, inclusion, and belonging. However, it has been brought to our attention that our Arab, Muslim, and Middle Eastern students lack similar levels of support. A significant oversight, given that approximately 14.7% of our student body identifies as Middle Eastern and 19.3% as Muslim. There's a clear and pressing need for dedicated support mechanism to effectively corner and address instances of anti-Arab racism and Islamophobic. To bridge this gap, I advocate for the establishment of a Muslim co-op engagement coach position. Now, as Mary Jane had said, there is within our equity department, there's two positions that would be identified to what we want. So there's no money. Let's be clear. It's not going to cost us any money. Those positions are already within our finance that we can use, right? So my amendment, is that as we consider amending to rename the position to Muslim or Arabic speaking coach, I want to emphasize again an important aspect of our hiring philosophy. this change in title and broadening inclusive and reflecting the diversity within our community.
Trustee Dixon, I'm sorry to interrupt, but,
Okay.
but we are still on the amendment whether or not to change 2.0 to 1.0.
Okay, so supplement, I still want to keep it at 2.
So, uh, if you're offering a sub-amendment to that, but I'm not sure
Yes,
that there is very much of a sub-amendment that you could do from a change from 2 to 1.
but also just calling it like a Muslim and Arabic speaking.
I'm sorry, that would not be in order. So we're only going to be debating the change from 2 to 1, which you either do or do not.
Okay, can I
support.
do it after that?
Pardon?
After we just, can I make
Yeah,
another
you can
change?
make it. Yes,
Okay,
you
perfect.
can.
All right, I will do that. Thank you.
Well, I will put you on the main motion speakers list because that's where we'll go when we're finished with trustee Kaplan-Mer's amendments. But in the meantime, we're not doing an extra amendment here. So with that, moving on into trustee Blackburn on the amendment which is before us, which is whether or not to change 2 to 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So my first question is directed, I guess, to the director, and he'll let whatever staff has the information. The student survey that trustee Kaplan-Merth refers to, is that a voluntary survey?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe so, as all of our surveys are for that we sent out on behalf of the district. They're not mandatory per se. It's voluntary. We
And I-
encourage and engagement,
Yes.
but voluntary.
Yes, and I notice some superintendents nodding that it is not mandatory. So I appreciate that, we do have some information from that survey, but it's not, I don't take the results as conclusive. There may be reasons why people don't, one, fill out surveys or might be concerned about anonymity or whatever, or not, fill them out entirely truthfully. The other concern I have with some of what's been stated is around police statistics and reporting of hate crimes. As somebody who's worked in the domestic violence field for many years in my past, we know that many people of different backgrounds and such are reluctant to go to police and report everything. So I don't put a lot of weight into those statistics. I won't repeat what Trustee Evans said, only to say I agree with what she said. And I believe absolutely and wholeheartedly that at this particular moment, 2 positions is entirely justifiable. We had many members of our community come out last week. Many of those people were turned away, unfortunately, but I know they're watching and they're paying close attention. Many members came out, some people for a second time, because they know it's that important that they're here with us tonight. So I urge my colleagues to continue to support what we agreed to last week. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I have no other speakers on this amendment on my list. Are there any other speakers to the amendment? So that brings me back to you, trustee Kaplan-Merth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I agree with everything that everybody said. I think it's really important that we have identity-specific supports. And I think it's really important that Muslim-speaking students or Muslim and Arabic-speaking students in our schools feel supported. And I think that the fact that we're not asking for additional money is great. I think, however, we cannot, we've arbitrarily said that this bunch of resources, which we somehow just have, should be allocated to a group where we have not seen, and I haven't heard from Superintendent Farish or from Director Buffon, any evidence that this is a group that is disproportionately targeted, and yet we're giving disproportionate resources to a group that is not targeted. And at the same time, you know, behind closed doors, that the Jewish community is crying for help, and our Jewish equity coach can't handle the amount of work that they are faced with because of the extreme anti-Semitism. So I ask again for you to consider that this should be a 1.0 dedicated to helping Arabic speaking and Muslim students from all around the world, from wherever they are, who are here, who are struggling, absolutely. And if we still have another 1.0, that should go to whatever group is most struggling. And today, that's the Jewish students in Ottawa. Tomorrow, it might be trans students in Ottawa, or it might be Asian students in Ottawa. We don't know who it will be, but to allocate specifically to a group where we do not have any evidence at all that there is a disproportionate targeting of Arabic speaking or Muslim students is just simply inappropriate. And for me to have to raise this now, because I wasn't here at the last meeting, is why I'm saying there's something fishy going on in terms of the geopolitics. Because yes, it's horrible what is happening in the world to many, many, many people in many, many situations. But we are focused on Israel and Gaza in a way that is inherently anti-Semitic. So I won't vote against this. I will support it because I really think it's important to have somebody to stand up for Arabic speaking and Muslim students. Absolutely. I will support it. But it's inappropriate for disproportionate resources to a group that is not disproportionately targeted. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. And so I will call the question on this amendment. And again, I will ask, please raise your hands. To vote, all those in favor? In favor of the amendment? Are you in favor? And those opposed?
Chair Scott, I'm opposed.
Thank you, Trustee Jennings. The motion fails, the amendment fails on a vote of 1 in favor, and I believe that was 10 opposed. So, or 11 opposed. I have to figure out how many trustees we have here at the moment. And so that brings us on to the next speaker, because I believe you were out of time, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. And the next person on my list is Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Manager Guthrie, I had sent an email with amendment language. I don't know if you need a minute to find it. I'm sure it's buried in your emails.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
I had proposed an amendment to what's on the floor. It should be with Manager Guthrie in her emails. I'm sure she's just digging it up. I want to give her a minute. Oh, I apologize. The word addendum should be included before the word the report. But that's because. Thank you.
So
Thank
are you going to introduce this amendment?
If I may.
Just before trustee Aziz goes, I believe it's supposed to say FTE at the end, not FTO.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Milburn. And I guess since we can all see and read it, is there a seconder for this amendment? Trustee Presley, thank you. Go ahead, trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your patience this evening as we wordsmith this amendment. The reason I've asked for this amendment to be broken into one FTE resource for students who identify as Palestinian, Arab, and/or Arabic speaking, and one FTE resource to support students who identify as Muslim is because, as we've heard this evening from delegates, and as we heard at the Committee of the Whole budget on March 19th from delegates, that those who identify as Muslim don't always identify as Arab or speak Arabic, and vice versa. It's important to recognize that the two identities intersect and overlap, but that they are also not one and the same. Those who are Muslim often face Islamophobia, but they don't necessarily experience anti-Arab racism, and those who experience anti-Arab racism don't always experience Islamophobia. Further, this evening we heard from delegates the importance of having separate equity coaches for the two identities, because we have the existing resources to do so, and it would provide additional strain to our budget, as echoed from responses from staff last week, and as again heard this evening, but instead ensure that the two appropriate resources be allocated to two distinct communities. Again, the reason I'm also clarifying this is because in the current language on the floor, in the previous language, sorry, of the 2.0 FTE for Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, and or Arabic speaking, there is a chance we end up with 2.0 FTE Arabic speaking coaches, but no Muslim speaking coaches, because they're not one and the same. Or we might end up with 2.0 FTE Muslim coaches, but not Arabic speaking coaches. Not to say that will happen, I'm just saying it's a possibility, and we might end up missing the mark with the goal of, in the spirit of what we're trying to do here, which is provide representation and support to communities who have expressed concern and desire to be better supported, and have also offered themselves of their own free time and voluntarily to work with the school board, to work with our fantastic resource officers, our fantastic equity team, to make sure that our educators and our students are supported, not just through the auspicious month of Ramadan, but as we continue throughout the school year. So I hope my colleagues will support this amendment, not because it's really that different from the original, but so that it's clear and it helps us to understand better the diverse nature of our student community and their supports. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Aziz. And the first question I will ask on this one is this friendly? Trustee Blackburn, it's not friendly?
I just have a question, Madam Chair. No?
Oh,
okay. Well,
okay, I'll allow it, hoping that it might be friendly after.
yeah.
It's not friendly regardless.
Well, the content
It's
is
not friendly regardless.
okay, but may I ask a quick question?
No, I will
Okay.
recognize you on the speakers list. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I noticed the language in the motion refers to one FTE resource to support students, and yet I noticed Trustee Aziz in her remarks, which I appreciated, by the way, refers to coaches. So is it staff's understanding that we are actually talking about equity coaches?
Through you, thank you for through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Trustee Blackburn. We currently have 2 student support workers who are non-academic, so not coaches. And those 2 student support workers identify as Muslim. One is also Arabic speaking. So we are looking at this motion as the entire team and not connecting it to a specific title or role, because if we're not adding additional resources, we're looking to see what we have and making sure that those are committed and dedicated in the way that you're directing us to do that. So at this point, I'm not reading this motion to say equity coach. I'm reading it to say a resource on our equity team that engages with community and also works in the classroom.
Trustee Blackburn?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm concerned a bit with that answer, and I apologize because like I say, I think even like Trustee Aziz was using the word coach, and I think we have been using the word coach. So I'll look to actually, can you put me back on the list?
We're in board.
Oh, sorry, yes. Okay. Can I sub-amend?
I suppose you could.
So I'd like to commitment of one FTE equity coach instead of resource to support students. Both times.
That's friendly for me anyway.
And is that a friendly amendment? It is not, and I'm going to ask for staff comment on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll start, and then again, I'll look to Superintendent Farish if I haven't got the spirit of this. What the ed door does for us, or perhaps it's at the end of the motion that gives us some flexibility, is it allows staff to have a complement on the equity team that is a combination of coaches and other resources, so that we don't lock this particular motion in, the dynamic on the team changes, and now we've got no resource support to work in the community and too many coaches, or too many coaches and no resource support to work in the community. So we can put them, I understand the spirit of what Trustee Blackburn is getting at. If we can put as a combination of coaches and resource support, staff understands the spirit of what the trustees are trying to get to. When you make this so specific, if something changes on the team, we're immediately imbalanced. The intent of what you're getting to gets wiped right out because we've locked it so tightly, we can't respond to pregnancy leaves, people becoming principals and vice principals, moving on to other positions because we've locked it so tightly. And then we're stuck trying to find an exact position that actually doesn't complement the equity team. It maintains the imbalance in perpetuity. So I think staff understands the spirit of what we're getting at, with the positions as resource. The and/or is tremendously helpful. We got it. We need a balance of support in the classroom and in the community. Staff will work it out.
And I was remiss in not asking for a seconder for this amendment. So is there a seconder for this? Trustee Aziz, you're seconding?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So further introduction, Trustee Blackburn, if any? I think you have a little time left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important that it be an equity coach so that not only can these people work with our students, but that they can work with our staff. I think it's really important. There's a lot of education that needs to be done. And so that's why I'm sticking with my position that it should be equity coaches. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And so now I'm starting a new speakers list on the sub-amendment. Trustee Dixon on the sub-amendment. You need to have your mic on.
Sorry, Chair. Within that, I think we need somebody that's going to be able to work with the community, the teachers and the students, and be able to reach out to members within our community that can come in and help our students at the same time, that understand. So I think it has to be somebody that's going to be very flexible within the portfolio, but still be able to go out and get the help that they need to help our students. I think that's really what we need. So it has to be somebody that's really committed and is really engaged with the community.
Thank you, trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Are you calling on me now? Okay. We don't have sub amendments or anything up there anymore. But the question I have, can we put it up there on the screen? Anyway, the question that I have is I guess again, why does it need to say to students who identify as Palestinian? What, because what I heard from, for example, what trustee Lyra said is that, you know, there are people from all around the world who might be Arabic speaking, or there are people all around the world who might be Muslim.
We're on the sub-amendment, not on the amendment. So that's whether or not it should say equity resource or equity coach.
Okay. I see. Okay, well then let me ask a question on that specific topic, which is either way, this is a resource that you already have, which is different from hiring a new equity coach, correct? So if this is a resource that we already have, why aren't we already using it in this capacity?
It's not an addition, but it could be a different person. Perhaps Superintendent Farish could explain.
And so so my understanding from before when we're hiring the Jewish equity coach is that an equity coach has to be an educator, correct? Whereas the other thing that you're saying, a resource would not have to be an educator?
Could be an educator, or might not be an educator.
And you're saying that we have the finances to do either one, because they're paid very different amounts, right?
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn over to Superintendent Farish and then to Superintendent Hall, just for a clarification with respect to the positions on the equity team and then our hiring practices.
Sorry, thank you, Director. Trustee Kaplan-Meier, to try to answer that question for you, we currently don't have an instructional coach that identifies as Arabic speaking or identifies as Muslim. We do have 2 student support coordinators, you're right, different role, different compensation, who identify as Muslim, and one of them identifies as Arabic speaking. So the addition of one, I shouldn't say addition, if we are going to ensure that we have 2 instructional coaches with those identities, then what we would be doing is using the vacancies as they come up per the cycle, because the instructional coaches have a cycle of 3 years typically. Student support coordinators don't have that cycle. So we will have those 2 individuals as student support coordinators. Those are permanent roles. They're currently in those roles and they will be in those roles. But the cycle of instructional coaches come up for renewal. And so we do have an opportunity because of the cycle to hire into those 2 roles. And that's the way that we were understanding this to be interpreted, so that it wasn't an additional budget expense. However, that is our understanding of it, that it's not an additional budget expense.
So you would have the funds, whether you're talking about having 2 equity coaches or 2 of the other resource things.
Through you, yes, that we would, because we currently have already been allocated 3 coach positions. One of them is a dedicated coach to support Jewish students. The other 2 instructional coach positions are not dedicated as such, except that they support, because we look to prioritize where our support is going based on student achievement well-being. And so those 2 equity positions are dedicated to supporting students who are racialized and other minoritized groups. And the student support coordinators are dedicated in that same way as well. So we have a student support coordinator to support 2 LGBTQ, trans, and gender diverse students. And so we look to ensure that we're really reflecting, as you mentioned, where the priorities are usually dictated through the roadmap, but certainly through the achievement data, well-being, climate survey information. So we would not have to spend additional money to get what is being requested of us. It will take 2 positions out of the 3. And the other 2 positions are already there. Student support coordinator positions are already there.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. But what you are telling me is that when you know that there is need in other communities, you will no longer be able to address that need because you will have allocated that to groups that you have not identified as being high need right now.
Through you, Chair, of course, there's intersectionality, and we want to make sure that that's we understand that as well, certainly with identities. So you could absolutely have support for students who identify as Black, Arab, and Muslim in one person. You could have that. It's the way that identities are expressed. For instance, Arabic speaking, there are different regional there are differences in Arabic speaking and the way that that's identified as well. So even having a singular person to represent Arabic speaking students is also we're not going to be able to rely on that resource. It's going to be the methodology that we use where we connect with communities. We do have, when we look at our data, we do have concerns about populations such as LGBTQ+. We currently have 1 position dedicated to that.
Right, but this would mean that if the 2S LGBTQ+ population needs more support, it won't be available because you've just allocated it to somebody else who has not demonstrated need.
And again, unless there was an intersectionality.
Right. So the intersectionality issue is interesting. Perhaps instead of Palestinian, it should say Middle East, and then that might include other people in the Middle East.
Moving on, the next person on my list is Trustee Lyra.
All right. I have a question about if the original motion, not the sub-amendment, the resource precludes us from using equity coaches to fill those positions.
To you, Madam Chair, no.
Okay. So given that it does not preclude the use of those 1 and 1 position in equity coaches, but that staff have requested flexibility in the event of parental leave or long-term promotion, I'm more inclined to support the original language with resource because I think it leads greater flexibility in the event of an individual who has to or who chooses to take a promotion. And so I am, I think, content with resources because it does not preclude it from being an equity resource. It means that they can still be an equity resource or a substantively similar resource that might not necessarily be an educator, but might have deeper ties to the community, for example. And so I'm happier with the original language, not the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. On the sub-amendment, Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just to very similar comment to Trustee Evans, just to reiterate some of the discussion, what I perceived to be the discussion in from last week was the reason that this motion was brought up in academic staffing, but we use the word resource is very much to allow the flexibility for the staff to use an equity coach, or as some of the delegations from last week had mentioned, there are other roles with expertise that might not be an educator-based position. So, like I said, this is brought up in academic staffing because of the potential for it to be an educator, but having it as resources, as we had crafted last week, allows for that flexibility that both Trustee Evans and the director have mentioned. So I believe that's the preferred, at least for me.
And we are back to the mover of the sub-amendment.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. I had my hand up for the sub-amendment. Sorry, trustee Blackburn.
Sorry, trustee Aziz. Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm in favor of this sub-amendment because I understood resource in the context of academic staffing to be an equity coach. And I honestly, I apologize that I didn't include it in the amendment language because that was what it was in my head. When we look at the delegations from this evening and from last week, we see the term equity coach repeated a number of times. I'm also concerned that relying on staff from the equity team who just happen to be Muslim or just happen to speak Arabic is relying too heavily on folks who are trying to focus their efforts in other areas in the equity team that they have been hired to do specifically for student support. And I appreciate and understand that people are hired for their intersectional identities, but that can also be a strain on their emotional regulation to try and support communities of intersecting identities in all shapes and forms. I also want to quickly shout out to our current student trustees and our former student trustee, Tabarak Al-Dalami, who worked tirelessly to bring forward this notion and echo the concerns that we've heard this evening and over the last year about the kind of support that the communities discussed tonight really need. And so I'll be supporting the sub-amendment because I think it's important that these communities have equity coaches. And I think that while I understand that the strain that, hiring glitches can have when it comes to promotions and moving around staff, because the staff I understand are on 3-year terms, I think this kind of flexibility can be made, especially considering our new equitable and inclusive hiring practices. So for those reasons, I will be in favor of the sub-amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, trustees. Excuse me. And much as I hate to do this, I will ask trustee Milburn if she would take the chair for a moment.
Happy to, trustee Scott.
Thank you. I think one thing that people are forgetting is that we often use common language where our staff use specialist language to describe different positions in our schools. We do not make, when we speak about the custodian, we do not make distinctions between different kinds of custodians. Many parents do not make very many distinctions between educational assistants and teachers. Everybody who is there working with their child in the classroom is a teacher. And when we talk about the members of the equity team, very often we refer to them as coaches. And whether we are talking about grad coaches, whether we're talking about quote equity coaches, or whether we are talking about other personnel, including the student support coordinators. So I would suspect that asking for equity coaches specifically, that does restrict it to teaching positions. If we use the term resource, we are not restricting it to teaching positions. The important thing is that the need is filled rather than what it is called.
Back to you, Madam Chair.
So back to the mover for wrap up on the sub-amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate all the comments from my colleagues. I feel that at the very least, if this amendment is defeated, that we should dedicate one equity coach at a minimum when we have dedicated one equity coach to other groups. And so in my opinion, in fairness, there should be one equity coach at least. So if this fails, I trust that one of my colleagues will amend it to ensure that this community is treated equitably and fairly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So on the sub-amendment, which is to replace the word resource in 2 instances with the word coach, all those in favor?
Sorry, point of order. Can I just ask why it's not clear to me because we've changed the language on here to equity coach twice. But we're not talking about approving equity coach twice?
The amendment changes resource to equity coach
But
in two places in the motion.
two places in the motion, but I just want to clarify, because what trustee Blackburn was just saying is she's talking about one equity coach and one maybe something else, but we have the equity coach here twice.
Sub-amendment relates to both of those pieces. So in each case, she was specific that resource gets replaced by coach. That is what is on the floor. And
So
that's
what is on
we're
the
voting
floor,
on.
to clarify, is two equity coaches.
Yeah, it's still 1 + 1 in the proposed amendment. Because we're an extra layer down, because that's a proposed amendment. And this is a sub-amendment to the originally proposed amendment, which referred to resources. So the only words are the ones highlighted in yellow. That's the only change. Do we want to see those words in there or not? So on the question of changing to equity coach, all those in favor? Yes?
Are we saying that those 1 and 1 is gonna be a tactic position? Because I really need to be clear. Like, we're looking for more of a resource. It does not necessarily have to be.
Equity coach explicitly refers to a teacher when we're talking human resources. So that is what is in front of us. Are we going to make these equity coaches? And we really have to vote on this. We're not debating it. We have finished our debate. The speaker has had wrap up. The thing is, you have to understand what you're voting on, and that is whether to change the words to say equity coach in two places in this instead of what was there before.
Point of order, you actually asked for wrap up before you asked if we had more questions, and we had more questions.
You only get to speak once at board. You've had your opportunity. I've been a little bit generous in making sure that was clear, but that is what we are voting on, because you need to understand that is what we are voting on. So I will call the question. All those in favor of incorporating the language that is highlighted in yellow, which says equity coach in two places? And those opposed?
Trustee
And the
Jenkins opposed.
sub-amendment fails. So I think that,
Do I have any time left, Madam Chair?
do you remember? I think you have something like 50 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to do a sub-amendment, please.
Another sub-amendment?
Yes, please. So one FTE equity coach who identify as Palestinian Arab and/or Arab speaking, and one FTE resources to support students who identify as Muslim.
Madam Chair, point of order.
I am having difficulty with deciding whether or not this is in order.
I don't believe it's substantively different than splitting the last vote in two halves and voting on them separately.
That is neither here nor there. I think that the question is, can this be done in this way? I think I will ask for staff interpretation of where this sits.
Turn this over to Superintendent Philip. Farish and Superintendent Hall, just to make sure this can work in the context of our equity cadre.
Whether
I
it's in
apologize,
order,
Executive Officer.
whether it's in order or not.
Madam Chair, I think it's a confusing scenario because in one respect, it puts on the floor something that was just defeated. And so would normally be considered out of order. What is unusual is the previous amendment was, or the previous item on the floor was a sub-amendment. So it wasn't possible to make that change at that time. And so I think on that basis, it probably could be considered in order because it wasn't achievable in the other way. It's not exactly the same, but I again, at the discretion of the chair.
So going back to the original amendment that was proposed by trustee Aziz, it said resources twice. The effort to change that to equity coaches twice was defeated. And the current sub-amendment would do what? Would change one of those to equity coach? Trustee Blackburn?
That is, sorry, I apologize. That is correct, Madam Chair.
And which one would change to equity coach?
The first one.
So this is the new proposed sub-amendment. And I think that would be in order on the basis of the fact that the sub-amendment couldn't be further sub-amended. Is there a seconder for this? And I'm not seeing a seconder. Are you seconding this?
Get clarification by asking Mary Jane a question. Is that, can I do that?
It'll be counting as your speaking time.
Okay, that's fine. Through you, Chair. Mary Jane, how does this sound to you? Do we have enough, like, the coaching? Because, like, the request was most of them wanted an Arab speaking, right? So if we change it to equity coach, doesn't that become a teacher's position? And do we have a teacher that speaks Arabic? So then would we have to go out and hire somebody within that position? I guess that's my question.
Through you, Chair. I think I understand the question. So with the change, with this sub-amendment, the equity coach position would be supporting students who identify as Palestinian, Arab, and/or Arabic speaking. So we would look to hire into a vacancy with that identity. So we would be reliant on who is applying, of course, and looking at the skill set as well that comes with being an equity coach role. So that would depend, we can do that. That's what we have the capacity to do, is to hire into those positions right now without adding an additional budget allocation. Yeah, and I thank you for the question, because I know it's difficult to know the intricacies of coach versus support, student support. And I might just take a moment to say that in the student support coordinators who we currently have to support Muslim students, that actually is their role. So that's what they have as a role is support of Muslim students. So it isn't something that's added on or layered on, that is actually the role that they are fulfilling. And that was as a result of the conversations that we had with Trustee Tabarrok last year, where we talked about what type of role do you see serving the community based on what was being heard. So just, I wanted to add a few of those comments because I was hearing, I just want to make sure trustees have as much information as possible with the nuances. Thanks.
So the question is still, is there a seconder for this? And Trustee Dixon, you are willing to second it? So we have a motion that's been introduced. We've sorted out that it is in order and it has been seconded, and we've had some clarification of what it means. Is there discussion on this sub-amendment?
Do I get introduction?
You do. However, I will remind everyone that it is already past 10 o'clock and we have a 10:30 vote and we have an 11 o'clock vote, and we still have other business to deal with on this agenda.
Madam Chair, I'm very appreciative of what you've just said, but this is very important to the Muslim community. So it's not something that I feel we should be rushing. I believe that one of these positions needs to be an equity coach. I hear what Superintendent Farish is saying about student supports, but a coach, we know, is more than that. We have students who feel harm from staff. I'm not saying it's intentional or unintentional or whatever, but that needs to be addressed. We have people who have come to this board who are very familiar, who presented to us, who are very familiar with the inner workings of the OCDSB, and they have been very clear that they want a coach. I think it's only fair and equitable that the Muslim community get at least one coach like other communities have gotten. That is fair, that is equitable, and that, my friends, is what I'm asking for. I think it's an appropriate compromise to what my first sub-amendment. Thank you, my colleagues.
So Trustee Dixon, anything further?
No, I'm in support of this.
Sorry, Trustee Scott, my hand is also up to speak to this.
I have you on my list, Trustee
thank you.
Aziz.
Sorry, go ahead, Trustee Dixon.
I'm in support of this.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra.
So I'm not in support of this because this will continue to bind the hands of our staff. The mover has said that they're doing this to support the Muslim community. They didn't even give the FTE coach to the Muslim position. So I'm not in favor of this. I'm not going to be in favor of the other one if they choose to sub-amend the other position either. I think it binds the hands of staff too much, and staff have already said that they would prefer it the other way. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize for the interruption earlier. It's hard to gauge the room from afar, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It feels like a bit of an imbalance with having one specific equity coach for the Arab, Palestinian, and Arabic speaking community versus one FTE resource, which could equal like two halves, or like it feels a little bit icky. And I know that's not real words, but I do appreciate what the mover is bringing forward. Either way, I'm happy that we've had this conversation, that the board has taken significant time to have these discussions, to discuss it thoroughly. It really practices what the director was saying earlier of learning and growing together, which is important. It might make us a little bit sleepy at this time on a Tuesday, but it's important. These conversations are important. Our students are worth it. So I won't be supporting the sub-amendment, but I do support the efforts made by my colleagues tonight to improve the conditions and learning environment of our Muslim, Arab, Arabic speaking, and Palestinian students. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on this sub-amendment? Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I totally agree. I think there should be a one FTE equity coach to support students who identify as Arab speaking and as Muslim. And I don't support this sub amendment because I think that that other 1.0 should be at the discretion of the staff to allocate to whoever happens to be most in need. And what we're doing is tying up that one other position so that when we have refugees from Afghanistan, or when we have refugees from Ukraine, or when we have other groups, there are no longer resources available for them. So I don't support this as it stands, but I do support a 1.0 FTE for Arab speaking and or Muslim students. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Kaplan-Murth. And I now have no more speakers on my list. Any wrap up?
None required, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I will call the question on this, which would replace resource with equity coach in the first instance, which to support students who identify as Palestinian, Arab, and or Arabic speaking. All those in favor of this sub-amendment? And opposed? And the sub-amendment fails. So that brings us back to debate on the amendment itself by trustee Aziz. Are there further speakers with regard to this amendment? And I'm not. And this is the amendment that is currently on the screen. Did you wish to speak to it? Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I'd already spoken to this particular one. So, so we're back to resources, and I would like to make a sub-amendment to this to suggest that it reflect 1.0 FTE resource to students who identify as, you can say, if you want to say Palestinian, Arab, and Arab speaking and Muslim, you can say all of the above. But I think the other 1.0 resource should remain available to whichever group is in most need as identified by our staff because of issues that are currently happening in our school. So I don't know how you want to word that, but you can keep the 1.0 FTE resource to everything you're saying there, but the other 1.0 resource should be to support students who are identifying as being in need, not tied to where they're from in the world. If you want, you can say who have some other geopolitical crisis.
I think the amendment was to the first section and not the second section, Manager Guthrie.
Actually, I was saying Muslim with the first group and the second group.
I'm just
It was the second.
struggling to make sure that I'm going to call a 3-minute recess so that we can have the language straight on this. So. Could please resume their seats. We have, I believe, language for this new sub-amendment. And I'm calling us back to order. And I will also note for everyone's information that it is an absolute necessity that we approve the academic staffing report with or without any particular wording in this amendment tonight, because the staffing process starts tomorrow. So with that, we have a wording for the amendment or this sub-amendment. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'd like to actually I'd like to call on Superintendent Barish to speak to why it's important to keep one resource available for the equity team to identify. need a seconder for my amendment.
And we need a seconder. Trustee Dixon.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, the way I read this sub-amendment is to say that we are making a commitment, as we suggested last week as well, when we discussed our investment from the equity team. We're making a commitment to support students who need our support, who have identities such as Muslim, Arabic speaking, and or Arab. So that's a strong commitment I see in here with the resource that's dedicated. So it's a direction that we must allocate that resource that way. And then there is a direction in here to say what we do with all of our hiring into the equity team is to ensure that it is evidence-informed, data-informed decision-making about who the identities that are represented on the equity team. So that's how I read that to be who are identified by the equity team. So that would mean that we're using data and we're looking at the cycle of how we hire into that team so that it's reflective of ensuring that the priority populations, populations that are showing up with disproportionality in achievement data and well-being data in that school climate data are represented to the very best of our abilities with the makeup of the team in the team identities and also obviously in the work that we do as a team in community and with community.
And does that suffice for introduction, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy?
Yes, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. I don't have anything more to add. I think Superintendent Parrish has said it very clearly.
So I will ask if this is friendly. Am I seeing a no, Trustee Presley?
No, that's fine. My apologies, Chair. I just wanted to raise my hand to move to the vote.
Sorry,
I just wanted to move to close debate when the time comes.
So normally we if nobody else has spoken to it, we could, if it is friendly, we could just go ahead and it's not friendly. So we should have one, I believe, one speaker at least before someone moves to close debate. Trustee Lara, did you wish to speak to this?
So I think this waters down our commitment to both the Muslim community and the Palestinian Arab and Arabic speaking community by reducing two positions that we have said in our previous committee of the whole motion that we are committing to that community to one and one of any other group. And so I think it would not behoove the board to water down our commitment less than a week after we passed something substantively working with a 2 FTE commitment. And so I will not be supporting the amendment on the floor.
Thank you. And I have Trustee Presley next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to move to close debate.
And that requires, I believe, a 2/3 majority, which means we need to have 8 in favor for that to happen. All those in favor of closing debate and opposed, and the motion to close debate is carried. And I'm back to Trustee Kaplan-Murphy for wrap up, if any.
So the wrap up, I think, is to reiterate that that the commitment here is to provide the resources that the students who are facing any form of discrimination need, and also to ensure that the equity team has the ability to identify those students on an evidence basis to support those who are most struggling. And we don't know who tomorrow that will be. We don't know where in the world that will be. And unfortunately, because of human history, it could be anywhere. So I would strongly encourage you to support what the equity office does to respect that team's ability to identify who is in need, and also to affirm a commitment to the Arab-speaking and Muslim students in our community. Thank you.
So you see the change here in the proposed amendment as sub-amended by trustee Kaplan-Murth. I will call the question. All those in favor of this amendment? And those who are opposed? And the amendment, the sub-amendment, sorry, is defeated. Which brings us back to my speakers list. Now, I did not have anyone else on my speakers list for this, so I think that brings us back to trustee Aziz on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to very quickly thank everyone for their time, and I appreciate their patience. And I like to encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of the amendment to the academic staffing. This is pertinent. It's important. I'm grateful for the thought that's been put into this. I'm thankful for my colleagues again for their support in having a thorough conversation about the issue on the floor tonight. And I hope they will vote in favor of the amendment. Thank you very much.
So I have, we have the amendment here in front of us. And I would like to call the question on this amendment. All those in favor? And those opposed? And the amendment is carried. So that brings us back to the main motion. And on my speakers list for the main motion, I still did have trustee Dixon and then I have trustee Milburn. Trustee Dixon, did you wish to speak to the main motion? Trustee Dixon? Yeah, this is now the whole thing that the part in purple has now been added into the rest. It has replaced what was there before. And trustee Milburn.
I would like to move to close debate.
And seconded by trustee Blackburn. Thank you. All those in favor of closing debate? And that motion, and opposed, that motion is carried. So that brings us back to trustee Lee for wrap up. None required. So that means that we have this motion, and I will ask if Manager Guthrie could open the vote in e-scribe, please. And I will ask people to please vote as quickly as you reasonably can, because we still have a few other items of business tonight, particularly the policy resolution motion. Trustee Bell, have you voted?
Unfortunately, I was cut off when you were explaining, I lost connection when you were explaining what the vote was. Could you please kindly repeat, Chair Scott? Apologies.
So we are now voting on the academic staffing main motion with the addendum, and you are voting how?
For the two parts, I'm voting in favor.
Thank you. And so the academic staffing motion with the amendment included is approved, 12 in favor, none opposed. That is a unanimous decision. Thank you very much. Moving on then to The next item, we have a notice of motion with regard to a policy resolution for the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Trustee Lyra?
I'll be very quick. So as you all know, OBSPA has a number of committees of trustees who meet. They're called caucuses. We have a Black Trustees Caucus. We have an Indigenous Trustees Caucus. I'm asking that we ask OBSPA to create an LGBTQ caucus so that trustees can meet to address issues that are specific to the LGBTQ community and give recommendations to OBSPA, who will give recommendations to the province. I encourage all of my colleagues to support this. Thank you.
And it is 10:30, which means that I need to call the 10:30 vote. This requires at least 8 trustees to vote in favor to continue the meeting past 10:30. All those in favor of continuing the meeting past 10:30? And those opposed? And I'm not sure if we had an abstention there. Sorry? Are there any abstentions? Trustee Bell, you're abstaining? So we had, what, 5 in favor? And so we don't have enough
Chair
to do.
Scott, it's Trustee Jenkins. I voted in favor of continuing. Did you count my vote?
I'm going to call the vote again, and I'm just going to ask those who are online if I can see Trustee Aziz, but if Trustees Bell and Jenkins would please speak out, or I can see Trustee Jenkins' hand. So I will call the vote again on 10:30. All those in favor of continuing past 10:30?
Trustee Jenkins in favor.
Trustee Bell in favor.
That's 6, I think. And opposed? Was it 7? But we need 8. Sorry? We still need 8. I'm sorry, but the vote has been taken and this meeting is at an end.
Madam Chair, if there's only 11 people voting, 2/3 of 11 is what?
2/3 of 11 for the purposes of this is still 8.
Okay,